Hello, RoahmMythril here once again, getting back to MagMammal 3. It's time for the judge commentary on the last couple of stages we just played through. Starting with 138th place, Decoy Man by the Great Metaphor. This stage got a 41.20, with a 1.8 in difficulty, 12.6 in design, 9.4 in fun, 6.8 in creativity, 3.8 in aesthetics, and 8.6 in functionality. Mick. Nice try with the fake out, but I didn't fall for it. Decoy Man does a good job making the initial level feel like an authentic rush job. Super quick to reach the boss, easy enemies, poor visual contrast, no real platforming challenge. I would have been fooled if it weren't for the name. To give the level some credit, the Crystal Joes in the rush job have some occasionally dangerous placement. Normally they aren't placed in ways that hit me, but I've been tagged here once or twice, and it's my own fault when it happens. Also, props for the Cutman M-Tank. I like the reward for the risky close-ranged kill. Unfortunately, the real level sees no improvement on the fake one. The enemies are still too easy. A real shame, since while the concepts have a lot of potential, the fake floors are a mild inconvenience at most, though that's better than frustrating. And the platforming is still dull. More prominently, the aesthetic is worse than the fake out, no thanks to the rather ear-piercing music. About the most interesting level gets is the token room, and even then, I can't remember most of it. I suppose I can give props for a custom boss, but Decoy Man is boring compared to Cutman, so the whole thing flounders. This started with a good premise, but the end result leaves a lot to be desired. It's a shame, really. Shinryu. If it wasn't for the title of the stage, you might have actually got me with that opening bit. Either way, I don't think it would have changed my perspective on this level all that much. This is a stage with a very promising idea, but ends up being held back by a lot of issues. For a level that's meant to be based around deception, the design here doesn't do a whole lot to properly capitalize on that. Terrain and enemy configurations barely complement each other, making almost every obstacle completely unthreatening. It's a bit disappointing since the custom enemies seem like they could be interesting to fight if paired with better room layouts. As it is now, almost everything here is pretty bare bones. The fake floor gimmick could have worked wonders to spice up the level, but the placement only serves to hinder your movements for a few seconds and might make you second guess a jump or two. On a related note, I can never tell if there was supposed to be an attempt at telegraphing with one of the fake floors in the token room. I bring this up since there's a Crystal Joe that routinely falls from near the top of the screen towards the end of that section, and it always looked a little off to me. That one oddity aside, the only thing left to mention is the boss, who is unfortunately just as basic as the rest of the stage. Decoy Man's pattern is completely fixed and predictable, and the clone he summons doesn't really add much depth to the fight. You'll still end up dodging him the same way, but now there's slightly less room for error. All in all, this is a disappointing end to a stage that never really lives up to its potential. So one thing I do have to say about the actual boss is, it's the kind of boss that I feel like is tailor-made to prey upon one of my weaknesses, and that is paying attention to multiple damage sources at once. This is something, for example, that makes Plugman actually fairly difficult for me, because I'm watching him bouncing all over the room, but at the same time I'm trying to keep an eye on the plug balls going up to the ceiling and falling down toward me, and that actually gets fairly tricky for me. So I feel like I had similar problems with the boss here, in that I was mostly paying attention to the real Decoy Man and that little artifact weapon that he leaves behind whenever he jumps, and trying to get around that, so more often than not I would get hit by the clone's shots. So yeah, it's the kind of boss that definitely feels like a me problem. Patchy. Illusionary Melancholy. Okay, you got me there with that fake out. That one was good. It fits the robot master in question, so I don't mind it. What I don't really like is that you can't tell which platforms are fake, while thankfully the stage restrained itself from doing something evil with it. This can still lead to some unfair situations while fighting the enemies. And that's really all there is going on with the stage. The rest of the level design boils down to straight paths while shooting the enemies in the way. There aren't any significant setups that keep the player engaged with the level. Also, the music. It's very disorienting and depressing sounding. I guess it fits the backstory of Decoy Man. Either way, it makes the stage kinda insufferable, intentional or not. Decoy Man has a rather simple pattern, but not so simple to get around with the projectile he leaves behind after each jump. Combine that with Decoy's high contact damage and a copy of himself showing up the later half of the battle, this quickly becomes a rough boss fight for sure. Okay, so yeah, Patchy and I kind of agree on that. Flashman 85. You have the blueprint for something truly special here. present the player with an unusually short and unremarkable level that was obviously rushed, then reveal the real level, which develops a thought-provoking story and subverts expectations at every turn. The problem is, this level topples its own potential by subverting all the wrong expectations. I'm talking about expectations such as text boxes that are free of typos, custom sprites in a style that reads as Mega Man, screen transitions that are safe from any angle, and music that doesn't detract from the enjoyment with dreary dissonance. I'm talking about a learning curve that teaches the player to be suspicious before being blindsided. I'm talking about challenges that grow in difficulty and complexity, and that consist of more than a bunch of stationary enemies hanging out on the ground. Checkpoints, screen count, overall focus, and a well-handled fake-out with Cutman are among the few things that meet my expectations. I do like the different varieties of metal, especially the cheeky token, and I like how the story is parceled out amidst a series of small challenges. I wish the story were worked into the boss fight, though. I think some dialogue and one final bait-and-switch of some sort would have tied the whole thing together nicely. Some things that are obvious should be more sneaky, e.g. the concealed turrets that stand out like a sore thumb, and some things that are sneaky should be more obvious, e.g. the fake floors that are utterly indistinguishable from normal floors. Theming could stand to be stronger. The plain foreground/background graphics don't seem particularly decoyish, and there's nothing really deceptive or surprising about the enemies that aren't disguised. I love what this level could have been, but it needs a lot of work to get there. Ace Spark. Man, after that intentionally crap opening, I'm not going to lie, I'm disappointed by this level. So much potential wasted. You had fake-out floors, disguised enemies, and the opportunity to really play with the player's expectations, which you didn't. Everything was rather predictable past the opening, which is sad. Few things I did rather like, as always. The rejigged dev kit assets are nice to see, and I actually love the fake floor enemy. It's a shame the 4-way Crystal Joe actually adds nothing to how you fight the enemy. He and the rejigged cannon never get placed in positions where their alterations amount to anything. Sadly, the level is just really basic at its core, and doesn't do much beyond the scope of the intentionally crap opening, other than a few nifty new enemies. There's also this weird backstory with spelling almost as bad as mine, and I eventually sort of zoned out by the final few signposts. They don't really add much. Also, the music had a bit too many high-pitched notes. The actual tune isn't bad, but the implementation is rather awful at times. I'm not sure what to make of Decoy Man himself. His pattern is super basic, but still puts out a challenge, as he hits pretty hard, and his small hops don't give that much room to maneuver. I appreciate the hologram, even if said hologram firing out harmful projectiles is a tad weird. Still, the stage is better for having an original fight, and I burst out laughing when I saw him, so I guess that counts for something. He has a very ROM hack quality all to his own. So, yeah, this stage definitely had a direction it was working toward, but I'm not quite sure it fully went as far as it could have. Though, in some ways, I will admit I'm thankful. Fake floors, especially with no tell, like, to where no matter how observant you are, you can't tell what's real or fake, I've never really been a fan of that mechanic. So, if the fake floors were used more problematically, but with an actual tell for you to pay attention to, I could have seen that working. This, it was wholly inoffensive, which I'm not sure if that really worked to the stage's benefit. It was just occasionally a little gotcha ditch that didn't really do anything. The boss, like I said, was very much a me problem. It looked like some of the other judges also kind of had the same problems that I did. Of, yeah, he hits hard, and sometimes it's hard to see where a projectile is coming from because you're too busy concentrating on something else. Overall, I do like the direction of the stage, but yeah, it is one of those that a little more polish would have gone a long way, I would say. And next up we have 137th place, Where Nomad Has Gone Before by Alex9000. This stage got a 41.40, with a 1.6 in difficulty, 12.2 in design, 9 in fun, 4.8 in creativity, 7 in aesthetics, and 8.4 in functionality. Mick. That is a word. Good grief of Molly Fallons. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but I'm as confused as the pineapple that said it. That's a lot of collectibles for a stage this small, and despite expectations, the two individual paths, high gravity and low gravity, converge into the same element if you go to their conclusions. Instead, the extras are all scattered along the top, and the only reason to go to the lower path is for some of the tokens, since you can get all of the elements from going up. That's a bit of a shame, as the lower path has more entertaining level design. Mixing count bombs, fans, and high gravity together works surprisingly well, and I was mildly impressed with the part where you have to activate a wall of bombs, run away, and then jump over the new hole to actually get through. It even managed to have a halfway interesting metal poton, which makes me a little upset that it doesn't have a checkpoint after it. Repeat fights wear out their welcome. The top path, by contrast, is basically just a bunch of low-gravity challenges, which have a tendency to be self-defeating thanks to the low gravity. They also have some kind of pointless extra elements, like a quickly dying Quint or a star section with smiles, uplifting messages, and getting briefly stuck on the floor. I really don't have a lot to say about the upper portion. It doesn't seem to have the same level of care. In its current state, this place honestly just baffles me with its content to collectible ratio, and parsing it enough to get a useful review out proved to be a real challenge. Personal recommendation? Should have just focused on the bottom path. That has a lot more going for it if you ask me. Shinryu. While this definitely isn't the most confusing level in the contest, I sure got thrown off by the odd level progression here during my first playthrough. Even after figuring it out, though, there's almost nothing to this stage. Besides the odd level structure, all the room/enemy layouts are incredibly easy to deal with. The only really notable thing I can think of to bring up is the Quint fight, mostly to question why it had to be done for one of the energy elements here. It would have been far better suited as a one-off gag or Easter egg. Granted, it's a gag that's been done several times before in other levels, but at the very least, it wouldn't have eaten up an element slot, and thus forced us to replay the stage another time for full completion. Other than that, I noticed that when teleporting into the room that eventually leads to the third energy element, you get stuck in the floor briefly, so there's that, I guess? Yeah, I'm sorry, but I got nothing else. This is just a very oddly put together, largely empty stage. Okay, so real talk, it's actually been a couple of days between recording the gameplay and actually getting a good take of reading out the judge commentary, so I forget if I noticed whether or not I got stuck on the floor when going for that element, or if it's another of those things that got fixed by the devs to prevent that. I don't remember getting stuck, but again, it's been a couple of days and I've attempted sleep since then. Patchy. One small step for Mets. As expected from the 3-element count, this level was fairly non-linearly, that is hard to say, non-linearly designed, but mercifully, it is overall not a very big stage. That being said, the level kinda suffers from a lack of challenge progression and polish. While each of the paths does offer somewhat its own coherent theming, for example, the top path being entirely played in low gravity, the rooms don't really get designed around that gimmick, as they are vastly empty spaces over more empty spaces. The gravity flipping on occasion is strange. Some of the room layouts seem to hint that there might be hidden paths that you can use the gravity flip to get around to, but most often they only lead to dead ends. The lower sections aren't all that impressive either, using common gimmicks like time bombs and fairly generic platforming challenges. Some misplaced collision objects in spots too that demonstrate a lack of polish in the stage as a whole. There is that wacky encounter with Quint with a whopping 3 health bars to boot. Thankfully his reign of terror was stopped as he was given a severe weakness to water shield. He was given a severe weakness to normal bullets too, from what I experienced. Flashman 85. Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the super-fighting robot Mega Man. His continuing mission, to explore strangely laid-out worlds, to seek out new life-threatening situations and completely bypass them with RushJet, to blandly go where tokens have gotten stored. Roll intro credits. Captain's log, stardate 20XDX 137-4. I wonder if the 137th place. Judge 4? Did they know what order they'd be doing their, how they'd appear in? That's the only guess I have for what the 4 means. The rest of it I get. A routine scan of a nearby space station detected 3 energy elements, usually a sign of an overambitious civilization expanding out of control. I beamed over to investigate. The station was unremarkable in appearance, offering no clues as to its purpose or owner. I intercepted a few audio transmissions. One was boisterous and grating. Another was a familiar sports anthem that was unexpected but oddly fitting. Different varieties of metal defended the station, but I noticed they tended to avoid interactions with each other and with the station's various environmental hazards. Only the largest metals in a high-gravity hallway offered any novel or memorable resistance. Paths branched and looped back on themselves unpredictably, with directional restrictions that eliminated the enjoyment of exploring a maze. I felt disoriented and occasionally unprepared for the difficulties ahead. One path took me into an alternate universe that seemed to exist only for a cheap chuckle. I wonder if all the robots I spoke with came from there. They seemed so out of place here, and they tried so hard to make me laugh while explaining things I would have rather discovered for myself. I'm lucky I survived the trip. The poorly constructed teleporter deposited me halfway into the floor. In retrospect, I should have been more wary. I spotted more than one instance of shaky construction on the station. I returned with all 3 energy elements and one lingering question. Was the creator of the station truly a lunatic, or simply another builder without a cohesive plan? And a spark. A level this linear should not be this confusing to navigate. Multiple paths pretty much meant most of the time I was looking for said alternative paths, rather than paying attention and having fun. It very much led to the detriment and ultimately killed any flow the level might have had. Most of the time, there wasn't even much point to them, especially given it's a pretty generic level overall. Gravity, count bombs, and mets. Stage elements we've seen a lot, even just within this contest alone. That all said, the level is fairly well tiled and doesn't look, say, bad aesthetically, but using things such as the base dev kit Yoku block graphic and a rather large amount of tile cutoff in places where you were lacking a tile type. I'm sorry, I lost my place in that. It's a bit rambly. And I just realized this entire paragraph is one sentence. That all said, the level is fairly well tiled and doesn't look, say, bad aesthetically, but using things such as the base dev kit Yoku block graphic and a rather large amount of tile cutoff in places where you were lacking a tile type do make it look very unpolished. We've gotten through it! The lower route with the graphic changing needed visual cues to make it obvious where and what happened. An audio cue alone is not really enough. The jump-through platforms also aren't telegraphed well enough, which can lead to confusion when similar-looking tiles are used as solid. That said, I have to say, the lower gravity does make mets significantly harder to deal with, but it's always nice to find a bit of spice to otherwise overused enemies. That praise does not apply to the Metal Poton Yoku block combo, who is just plain tedious if you try Buster only, and the mets it spawns are a real nuisance. There are definitely cases where your placement of things lead to glitches or getting shunted into terrain, and the teleporter for the 3rd element placing you within the ground was just sloppy as heck. Metal Daddy is a bit of a weird case. I'm not sure if its changes make it a more novel fight or not. The fight is clearly harder, but isn't in such a way that's unfair. The new starting health is just really strange though. And on the topic of the other path's boss, Quint, the best way I can describe my reaction to this is meh. The trope of boss looks super powerful but is felled in 1 or 2 hits is overdone to death, and here it's done with dev kit assets. As such becomes even more formulaic, predictable, and thus utterly eye-roll inducing, especially doing this with everyone's punching bag, Quint. I don't think there's any real way of handling this with just the dev kit, and at this point, it ends the level on a damp squib rather than anything approaching an acceptable climax. Even with 3 elements, I can't say it outstayed its welcome, but it was all rather too basic, and never really justified the extra routes. Quint especially was an unwelcome addition, and focusing on the core portions of the stage rather than spiraling all over the place is the only real way you can explore elements rather than just plop them down and make a bare-bones mediocre stage. Overall, this stage, it did feel a bit convoluted and rambly, and in kind of an awkward way. It is like they pointed out, the fact that both paths kind of curve in on themselves and just lead to the same thing depending on which paths you take. It probably would have been better if you had just stuck with either just do 1 path, 1 element, or if you wanted to do 2, you wanted to do a low gravity and a high gravity, make the 2 paths their own distinct thing. Don't make them curve back in on each other, because that did kind of lose some of the identity there a bit. I will say Quint is a complete non sequitur, but myself, I found it amusing. It's one of those jokes that's not going to land with everybody. Personally, I thought it was funny. It also doesn't hurt that Quint is not exactly one of my favorite classic Mega Man characters. He is just a walking time paradox that Wily really was not thinking about what he was doing that day. Or days. Time travel. But yeah, overall, this stage, I put it as, it was okay, but again, yes, we're definitely in this part of the contest where the stages are okay. They're not truly offensive for the most part, like just overly annoying to where they wear out their welcome for the most part, but definitely more polish is needed, tightening things up, or just making things flow a little bit better. But overall, not a bad stage, and hey, Durgan can have a couple of easy stages this time, as a treat. So with that, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're enjoying the series so far, and I shall see you again next time. Until then, fare thee well.